What's up, everyone? Welcome to Hong Kong FinTech Week 2022. My name is Jason, and I'm with HashKey Group. And joining with me today is Henry Chambers, Senior Director at Alvarez Marsal, as well as Calvin Koo, who is a lawyer at Kobre Kim. How are you guys doing today, Henry?
Great. Thank you very much, Jason, for having us on to have a chat with you. It's brilliant to be here at Hong Kong FinTech Week. It's really buzzing, right?
Yes. As Mr. Paul Chan has put it earlier today, Hong Kong is back in business, right? Now, how has your experience at Hong Kong FinTech Week been so far, Henry?
Oh, it's been fantastic to see the vibrancy, the number of stands. There's a real energy about it, which I think has, whilst been there the last 2 years, at the moment today, I really feel it. And exactly right, Hong Kong's back in business.
Were there any highlights for you so far at FinTech Week? Like, was there any booth that kind of caught your attention?
Well, I think in terms of highlights, obviously one of the things that we look at as lawyers and forensic accountants is regulations and development on that front. So obviously seeing Paul Chan's announcement today is kind of growing the digital asset hub of Hong Kong and the potential for future retail investors was a real high point for us seeing that announcement.
And Calvin, so Henry has been in Hong Kong FinTech Week last year. Is this your first time, or how many times have you been here before?
This is my second time. My first time was last year, actually.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. And tell us a bit about Kobre Kim.
So Kobre Kim is a global law firm focused on disputes and investigations, usually involving an issue of fraud. And so that's how I sort of got into the crypto space, because unfortunately, there happens to be a lot of fraud in the space. And that's not because of the crypto by itself. It's just because bad actors tend to take advantage of new technology when it first comes out.
Okay. Now let's just dive into the topic of frauds and scams and all that and hacks, right? Now, my question is, the notion of blockchain is that blockchain is pseudonymous. You know, it's traceable, right? Everything you can trace on the blockchain. Why would people want to commit these hacks when it's possible to some extent to kind of trace back, who did this scam in the first place? Like when you look at the infamous hack at Bitfinex a few years ago, right? It happened in 2016, but people were managed to find who the perpetrators were by just tracing all of the blockchain dots, here and there. So can you comment about that?
Sure. I mean, that's actually a really good example for both the reasons why bad actors might pursue it, but also what the solutions are. Obviously, you mentioned it took place in 2016, so it took a long time, and it also took sort of the resources and patience of the U.S. government, right, to help put into that. And yes, they took advantage of the fact of a lot of aspects are transparent on the blockchain, but they also had to work with different centralized entities to get information behind the scenes, to get past that pseudonymous nature, right? So there may be, and obviously I'm not saying I'm speaking for bad actors, but what it seems like is there are some bad actors that feel like they're able to put up enough walls and enough screens that make it worthwhile for them. Henry, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I think, one of the benefits of cryptocurrency is also the negatives it relates to fraud. The speed at which you can move huge values, you can do it like that overnight, jurisdiction to jurisdiction. The fact that you haven't got a centralized intermediary looking at all transactions, it's decentralized. There isn't a gatekeeper. So whilst that's good for the notion of decentralization and all the benefit that brings, it also brings some of these negative externalities whereby you don't have someone looking over everyone's shoulder. So you do have the instance where bad actors will exploit this for their own gain and their own ability to move assets very, very quickly. I think the other thing is whilst we can see the movement through the blockchain, and whilst we can see balances sat with certain wallet addresses, the challenge is associating those wallets with individuals. So if we don't find an exit point, an off-ramp, or some other information, it can be challenging trying to find and seize those assets. And that, again, is why it's probably quite attractive, I would imagine, for fraudsters to use.
Now, Henry, speaking of crypto fraud, now you're also kind of a specialist in this area. Can you briefly tell us, what do you do at Alvarez Marsal, as well as the second question, what is the most common crypto fraud / scam we see nowadays?
Sure. So I'm a senior director at Alvarez Marsal's disputes and investigations practice. I'm a forensic accountant by training. So I've spent 10 plus years dealing with traditional finance frauds, traditional corruption, all through fiat currency in meat world. Now, over the last 24 months, I've been developing a specialism in applying those traditional forensic techniques to the crypto world. And so what I find and what we see is actually the tracing of tokens through bank statements is not that different from tracing tracing dollars through bank statements is not that different from tracing tokens through the blockchain, if you know where to look and how to look. So I applied those skills, and that's how I've kind of developed this kind of practice that we work in. Now, in terms of the commonality types of fraud, I think what we still see a lot of in the crypto space is deception frauds. Frauds where people are professing to be something that they're not, or promising something that they can't deliver. And so this is not that different really to traditional finance. I must say these types of frauds exist in that world as well. And crypto in and of itself is not the bad guy, but certainly it can be used to undertake these types of frauds. So we're talking about things like romance scams or Ponzi schemes or investment scams. These are all typically share one commonality in that it's someone using deceit to obtain assets from another individual, all with obviously slightly different typologies. And that is continuing to come across my desk day in, day out. And I'm sure it come across Calvin's as well.
Yeah, I agree. We're seeing a lot more of these types of scams, and it's not just individual victims. Sometimes it's corporations, business frauds, things like that. And they're getting very, very sophisticated. It's not the types of scams where it's an email full of typos and some red flags might go off. These bad actors, unfortunately, put a lot of time and effort into making legitimate-looking websites and use legitimate sort of third-party intermediaries to give themselves a veneer of being a legit investment or a legit person. And then, unfortunately, after a few months, usually the game gets revealed and people are out money.
Now, over this past year, we've seen lots of very high-profile hacks in the DeFi space, right? Large monies were drained out of these protocols. Now, can you share with us what are some strategies or what are some protocols that these projects can implement to preempt these scams from taking place?
I would say, I'm not necessarily a cyber expert. I'm also not a programmer. What I would say, though, is where we're seeing these exploits are really at the cutting edge of a DeFi space. We're seeing them in bridges between blockchains, and blockchains weren't necessarily meant to be interoperable, right? So it is people's innovation that's trying to generate that. And with innovation comes, it's not perfect, right? So when it's not perfect, there are going to be people who will spend a lot of time trying to exploit it, find a way around the rules of the program that you've written. So one thing I would say, and I think it's maybe a booth here that does it, smart contract audit, code audit, understanding whether someone else, a third party, can verify what this protocol does and whether they can find any exploits or any potential breaches that can be had therein would be one way. I'd be looking to try and ensure that my protocol, my software is protected from potential breaches.
I think that makes sense. Again, I don't have that background from the technical side, but I think, appropriate planning, making sure, there are every number of providers out here now that are sort of adapting their skills learned in sort of the traditional world, traditional security world, legal, forensics, that are now applying it to the blockchain space. So look out for that type of assistance.
Now, my final question of the day is, because we've been talking about frauds and scams, that's kind of a heavy subject, right? Let's be more lighthearted. What is the first thing that comes to your mind when I ask you, what's the most memorable moment in crypto for you over the past 5 years? The first thing that comes to your mind.
Well, maybe it's recency bias because you brought up the Bitfinex thing, but seeing what the U.S. government did to trace it, to understand the full path of what they had to do to reveal that, and of course the characters behind it are fascinating.
I'm going to take your 5 years and I'm going to expand it by 10 years. And I'm sure a lot of people have got these types of stories. But my most memorable crypto moment was when I was a trainee accountant in 2012 and I couldn't afford to buy a Bitcoin mining rig. I couldn't afford to buy the card. And if I was to look back now, and had I done that, and quite where I'd be now, would probably be a different story.
Well, fair enough. Well, thank you so much for speaking to me, Henry. Pleasure.
Thank you,
Calvin. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jason.